Mr. Grant Gerson, you're 91 years of age and you're the owner of this entire property, 120 acres. How did you start? How did this land become yours?
Well, I started Calamigos Covered Wagon Club before I had this property. And because I was working for the YMCA, at the end of the season, I decided to start my own camp. And I sat down in my tent up at Crystal Lake above Azusa. It was a primitive camp for 9 different Los Angeles Ys, and they brought the kids up, and they ran the program, but I provided the food and facilities for them. So at the end of that season, I decided I didn't want to work for the YMCA and wind up with a banquet and a gold watch, because I'd worked for myself ever since I'd been 9 years old, and selling papers and magazines and stuff like that. So I sat down that night in my tent and I decided to start my own camp. And I didn't have money to buy property, so I figured I'd have a travel camp. So I called it Calamigos Covered Wagon Club. And I designed a logo. It was a red shield. Behind the red shield was sticking out on each end was the covered wagons. And on the red shield, there was a white star. On the white star, there was a green pine tree representing the outdoors. And underneath the star, there was a gold scroll. And I borrowed something for our motto: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, only do it first. And then I decided to tell the story of Calamigos, where I first heard it. Because when I was about 10 years old, we had a dentist in downtown Los Angeles. I grew up in Los Angeles in the Wilshire district. And he had a patient by the name of Captain Fremont Scott, who was a wagon train captain who led wagons west. And he knew I was always interested in cowboys and Indians. So he arranged for my mother to meet Captain Scott. He lived in Boyle Heights, right above downtown Los Angeles. And I was only 10 years old then, but I kept in touch with him. And one day he told me the story of Calamigos. He said his Indian scout came to him and said, Captain Scott, we're being followed by Indians. He said, well, I want you to set up a meeting with the white chief and the Indian chief. Well, he had no gifts or trading materials, so he went to his blacksmith. He said, I want you to make a necklace of horseshoe nails. I want you to take the sharp end, bend it into a loop, and string him on a leather thong with a knot between each nail. When he had to meet the chief, he was wearing that. So when the chief looked at it and he noticed him looking down, he took it from his neck and put it around the neck of the chief. The chief raised his right hand and said, How Calamigos, which meant come as my brother, come as my friend. So when I started my own camp, I thought that would be a good name. And that's how it all started. And that night, I sat down and designed this logo, and Calamigos Covered Wagon Club is founded upon the 5 points of fellowship represented by the 5 points of the star: reverence, loyalty, honesty, self-reliance, and sportsmanship.
Can you repeat those again slowly?
Sure. Reverence, loyalty, honesty, self-reliance, sportsmanship. Those were the 5 points of the star. And then I wrote a pledge. I pledged to be reverent to God, loyal to my country, family, and friends, to be honest with myself and my neighbors, to become self-reliant, not dependent on society, and to be a good sport whether or not I win. And I think my senior partner had a lot to do with that, God, because I just realized when I look back at my life, a number of years ago, I realized that he's put me in the right place at the right time all my life. And it's just so wonderful.
You've obviously had a lot of blessings, but even with the path and the journey of blessings, there's always trials and tribulations. What are some of the trials and tribulations you've overcome?
I don't think I ever had any.
Now, wasn't there a time when all the property here burnt down?
I've had a very, very nice life because my mother and father, my father was an income tax specialist. I mean, he hated accounting, but he loved his tax work. And he had a reputation at people who had their other taxes done by another accountant. he knew the law so well he could usually save them some money on most of the people that came to him. And my mother was a housewife, and we lived in the Carthay Apartments at Wilshire and Fairfax, the Wilshire district. And we had a lady who was going to school at UCLA, Bonnie Brunstetter. And her parents owned a ranch in Dunlap, California. And I would go up there 2 summers, and her dad taught me how to shoot a .22 and skin a rabbit. And the only thing in the house for the heat was in the fireplace in the living room, and the wood stove in the kitchen, and there was 1 bedroom. And I slept in my sleeping bag on the couch. And I went up there for 2 summers with her. And I'd go out in the morning with the .22 and shoot a rabbit and skin it out, and her mother would fry it for me and for breakfast. And I learned to milk a cow. And they had a 2-holer out in the back, privy. And you know what they used for toilet paper?
No, but I'm curious.
It was the old Sears Roebuck catalog. In those days, it wasn't slick paper.
Well, that might have been one of the challenges you had in life. How do you perceive challenges? Because when I made reference to trials and tribulations, you said no. So when things happen that other people might perceive as trials and tribulations or things going wrong, how do you perceive them? How do you view them?
Well, I look at the bright side. I mean, it's like my age. I'm only 91, but I'm still riding my horse, and it's only numbers. But I think all my life I've looked at the bright side instead of the bad side, because I guess that's how I got into Calamigos.
You started with 15 acres here, and now it's 120 acres.
Right.
At what point did you say, oh, I need to start a treatment center here? How did that happen?
Well, that was Glenn. That was my son, because he met a fellow who had run this kind of a program, and he was an alcoholic, by the way.
The guy that had run the program?
That's how Glenn got started with Milestones. And that's how it started. And then it's grown since.
And why and how is it special to you and to your heart?
Because what they do for people of need, that's why. And I've even given them, my mother was a seeker. My mother and father were both Jewish, but they never practiced. In fact, we celebrated Christmas instead of Hanukkah. And, but she was into Christian Science at one time, and several different religious organizations, and also Unity. And Unity is a company that's in Unity, Missouri, started over 100 years ago, and they put out a little booklet called Daily Word. And it's just a thought for the day. And sometimes you open it up and you think, my God, how did they know? And so I give a lot of those subscriptions away because my mother started with that. And so anyhow, it's a very positive approach to living. And I think that's very important, so I give a lot of those subscriptions away.
What do you think is your greatest blessing in life?
Well, today it's my second wife, Ruth, because she is so special. And in fact, the way we met, and Glenn was instrumental in doing this, plus my senior partner.
He often intervenes.
I'm a skier.
Okay.
In a snow skier.
Okay.
And we have my wife and I have a condo at Mammoth, and so we had a fire here in '78, and I had taken Mrs. G to a clinic in Romania, and on Wednesday night I get a cablegram saying emergency call the ranch. Well, the first thing I could think of, her mother was living with us, and I thought she passed away. I called the ranch. I couldn't get through. I called Glenn, who lived with Mon Lee, his wife, on Mulholland, about 5 minutes away. Couldn't get through to him either. I called my assistant, Darrell Milgram, who lived in Westlake, and I said, what happened? He said, we had a little fire. I said, well, how bad? He said, well, it was pretty bad. I said, well, what about the kids? the one school that we started the outdoor ed program for the Los Virgenes School District, and we had other schools came, and it was a 5-day program. They'd come on Monday and stay through Friday. The one school that ever came that day, because the fire was Monday, and Darrow said, I said, well, what about the kids? He said, well, we had this couple of school that came on Tuesday. Again, my senior partner had something to do with this, because he had only 10 minutes to get out of the ranch. And I said, what about the animals? He said, I remember what you told Lynn and me. If there's ever a fire, open up all the corrals and all the pens, let them all out. They all ran to the corner of the ranch. It didn't burn. We lost 14 buildings in that. And all my collections, I had a whole museum, my gun collection, saddle collection, Indian collection, all that stuff burned up. Even a 30-foot outrigger canoe that I brought back from Hawaii when Mrs. G and I went there, because one of my campers' father was an accountant, and he was doing accounting for us then. And he had a man who was in the travel business, and we horse traded for a trip to Hawaii and for his kids coming to camp. So anyhow, in Waikiki, there was a man building a giant canoe, and we got acquainted with him, and he hated most haoles. But I think because we were working with kids, he took a liking to us. And one day he says, Grant, you know, I've got a canoe in my old grandmama's yard, and maybe you'd like to have it for the kids. I said, oh yeah. It was a 30-foot koa outrigger canoe with the outriggers were logs, and it was all tied together with hand-plaited coconut fiber rope. Well, I bought it. I won't even tell you how little money I paid for it. Anyhow, when Ruthie and I got married, she's my present wife, she hadn't been to Hawaii. And a friend of mine, Charlie Cook, who was the hereditary Chumash chief, and he has Satwiwa, which is a cultural center over at Point Mugu State Park. And Charlie was a good friend. And I said, Charlie, you know, I'm going to see if I can get some information for you. Why don't you have Satwiwa and representing all the Indian tribes in this area? Because that at the Polynesian Cultural Center, it's run by the Mormon Church, and the kids that they have going to school there represent all of the islands in the South Pacific. So I made arrangement with the head archaeologist at the organization, and he was taking us around, and we get to one area where there's a canoe just like the one I had. I said, well, gee, I used to have one just like that. He said, what do you mean you used to have it? Well, it burned up in the Agora Malibu fire. He said, Grant, you know what that'd be worth today? And this was 25 years ago, about $100,000.
Wow.
And I used that down at Paradise Cove because I made a deal with Joe Morris, who owned the cove at that time. In exchange for our using the beach 5 days a week, his grandkids could come to camp. And I built a corral overlooking the ocean, and put a place for the horses, a little wire corral, and 2 cabins would stay overnight. One cabin would go on the bus, and the other cabins would ride the horses down, and then they'd both stay overnight, and then they'd switch. And today, you know what's on that particular portion where we had 3 mobile homes, and one of them is worth $3 million, overlooking the ocean. Anyhow.
Grant, you said that one of the blessings in your life, maybe the greatest blessing, was your second wife, your present wife. What would you say is the blessing that you've given to other people?
I guess that's the Star Society, because when this gal who grew up with me now lives in Israel, and she said, Grant, can I use Star Society? I said, of course, and you don't even need to give me credit. Well, she used it, and she got horseshoe nails. In fact, I just read a letter. She got her second box of horseshoe nails. And the kids that live up to that philosophy that I talked to you about, the 5 points of the star and the motto, and she has made those kids, when they get an air raid, they have to go right to their dugout. But she has used that. she said, "Can I use Star Society?" Of course. And I said, and the Jewish star has 6 points. And the sixth point of the star means making the world a better place to live in. And the kids have improved so much, and even their families, with that philosophy, that it's made such a difference. And I thought, well, my God, I said, so now we have that. I'm writing a book called You Can Make the World a Better Place. And then the Star founded upon by joining Star Society International, because after I got Shelley's letter, I thought, why should we just limit it to Calamigos? And now we have Star Society International.
Well, obviously, another gift that you've given, a tremendous gift, is Milestones Ranch Malibu as well, because you talked about making a difference, helping other people,
Right.
and that's helping so many people. It's
Right.
been helping, it will continue to help. That's part of your legacy. Just in closing, what would you say is the greatest thing that you've learned in your life that you would like to share with someone else?
Star Society.
The 5 points.
The 5 points, the star, and the motto. And not only that, when I ran camp, I used to tell the kids, you can't receive anything with your hand like this. Got to be open. And Glenn exemplifies that. He's giving all the time, and he works 24/7, and he loves it.
So ultimately, the message is about being open and giving to other people. And thank you very much for giving to us and actually giving your land, your property, your energy, your enthusiasm, your passion, your heart to actually make such a big difference. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for
Thank you.
this.